Greetings, I'm John the Spirit. Imagine bees, but they eat living animals to make honey, and imagine you were playing a game where devs changed recipes mid-playthrough to make the game more interesting, but now your builds are broken. Are you horrified now? And welcome to Factorio Pyanodon Recap Supershorts. In this special episode, I know absolutely nothing about how Arqads work or how we made them, so I have Archie here to help me figure out what the fuck went on when we did this. Whether or not his voice appears in the episode is still in question. You might think, upon first looking at Arqads, that they're just a normal, nice, easy-to-use animal where you plug stuff into a creature chamber and you have your first Arqad, and then you make a loop to make more Arqads, and everything is good and happy and easy. But if you thought the Pi devs had exhausted their ability to make interesting and terrifying mechanics surrounding animals, you would be wrong. Suppose you had Arqad modules, and you wanted to make more Arqads TM, you would need an Arqad nest. To make an Arqad nest, you would need Arqad maggots. To make Arqad maggots, you need Arqad eggs. But where oh where do you get Arqad eggs? They're bees. I wonder what bees are made from. They are made from an Arqad queen. And every time you use an Arqad queen, you have a 1 in 1,000th chance to lose the Arqad queen. And whenever you want an Arqad queen, you have to roll for a 1% chance of getting one. Now you may be thinking, Jonathan, wow, that's incredibly fucked. And the answer is yes. Yes it is. Now, there were some slight changes between when Arch made this build and now that we're recording it, where the way that you start the loop changed. The recipe that initially makes Arqads also makes Arqad eggs, which is nice because you need the Arqads as modules, but you also need the eggs to make more Arqads. But somewhere along this recipe line, you need something called Arqad honey. And Arqad honey is produced using an Arqad honeycomb recipe, and you can empty those Arqad honeycombs to get the honey out of them. But you get those in a perfect loop. It used to be you could craft the Arqad empty honeycombs out of, non-Arqad things, like oleochemicals, which required lard, and everything was bad, and Relesia and stuff like that. Your Arqads would be busy bees and make your combs for you. But now, to get those Arqad empty honeycombs, you need to get something called wax from an outside source. Now, worry not, Arqad empty honeycombs, once they are inside of the loop, are, in a perfect loop, you make a honeycomb and you fill it, and then you get an empty one back. Even better than that, you actually get a small extra increase in the amount of wax you have as you go through the Arqad Queen creation loop. But you need that wax from somewhere, and that wax from somewhere we did not have when we made these Arqads, and we still don't have it now, which means Arch is mocking it up in Blueprint Sandbox as we speak. Remember when I said automating cDNA was absolutely crazy and no one should do it before logistics science? Well, it turns out automating it after logistics science is a damn good idea. And that's why there's 67 of it in here, because I, anticipating Arqads in my infinite wisdom, said, wow, I bet we're gonna need a lot of fucking cDNA. And I was vaguely correct, but also wrong, because Arch and I are cheaters. Every time you want to do a roll for another Arqad queen, you need Arqad eggs, and the only place to get Arqad eggs before you have a queen is from the Arqad recipe that uses cDNA. So I made lots and lots of cDNA. We were prepared for this eventuality. But then we began rolling for Arqad queens, and we finished our playing for the day, and Arch said, Jonathan, I have 10 hours tomorrow to watch anime and roll for Arqads. And so, because Arch is such a good guy, he set up the Arqad Queen rolling recipe, and then spent 10 hours save scumming over and over and over again while watching anime until he got Arqad Queens. 10 hours is admittedly a bit of an exaggeration, but he did have lots of time, and he did do it many, many times. And in our defense, we do not need any of the products of Arqads, and we have not used any of the products of Arqads. We're basically not going to use these in science, and we set these up really early. So if we had wanted to wait, a thing we could have done, we certainly would have. I had the infrastructure in place to automate cDNA. It was not going to be a hassle to do this. But Arch had 10 hours and a lot of anime. And I think he deserved a little reward for all that work. Making this crazy, absurd, insane loop. Which at the time required oleochemicals, which were even crazier. I mean, they're not that crazy. They require, lard. But now we do not require the oleochemicals, so it's okay. Nowadays, to start the crazy loop that allows you to start rolling for Arqad Queens, we need that wax. And to get wax, we need to create a being, plant, fungi, animal, unclear, called Tuuphra. Now, I'm not sure whether to pronounce the second U, so every now and then I'll say Tuuphra, and every now and then I'll say Tuuphra, and you will not be able to tell because it's a stupid distinction that I made up myself. The recipe for the Tuuphras initially actually requires poor alien samples, which is cute, because you're already making them in science, but you have to steal them. So you better make sure you have a slight backlog, something that I was so sure we had for automation science packs until I needed 3,000 automation science packs for something else completely unrelated and discovered that the steel chest was completely empty. But anyway, Tuuphras, we made them. And, well, we haven't made them, but we're pretending to make them now so that you can see them. Arch is building the shit you need for Tuuphra. Say hello, Arch.
Hello, Arch.
Wow, bet you never thought you'd hear another voice than mine in one of these videos, huh? You should check out our streams every Tuesday in the link in the description. I promise I'm nowhere near as coherent in the streams as I am in these videos, but am I coherent in these videos? That's also unclear.
No.
Man, just look at this Tuuphra building. I don't know what it's doing, but it's cool. Like, what? I'm not going to try to explain it, just bask in its glory for a moment here. The Tuuphra loop is pretty classic. You take Tuuphras and you make them, and then you make them into seeds, and then you put the seeds back in and you get more Tuuphras, because that's how plants work. The plants do need a couple weird things. Soil is certainly the weirdest. Whoever said you put plants in soil? But you can get coarse fractions for these Tuuphras, and you haven't needed so far, from a solid separator that turns soil into sand, coarse fraction, limestone biomass. And I will have you know that this sand recipe is way better for sand from soil than the recipe where you wash soil and turn it into sand. And this bit me in the ass for the glass build that I still haven't shown you. But anyway, soil to coarse fraction, it's cool. And then you need something called manure bacteria, which is, you know, what if you grew bacteria in manure? Petri dishes, agar, manure, stuff you probably already have in your bus or train base. We're burning up all the excess, currently useless shit from the solid separator, and we're doing so surprisingly slowly because there's insufficient biomass. So note to anyone playing, if you need to fuel the burner with other stuff. The biomass will not be enough. Once you have excess Tuuphras, as always, you can then, output them to a new building, like this pulp mill, where we turn Tuuphra into biomass for some reason, and A-type molasses. A-type molasses combined with lime, which is made from coke, to make sweet syrup. And then if you, make the sweet syrup with bones, you get sugar. I feel like you don't normally make sugar with bones in the real world because sugar crystallizes itself, but Arqads like eating things that are animals, so maybe that's what is the reason. I thought they had made sugar just for this Arqad thing, but it turns out sugar was a thing that is in many other places in the game, and eventually we'll need it. So I think it's cool that they reused a product. And we would not have made Tuuphras otherwise, like, for real. So, I mean, it's cool. Not that we did make the Tuuphras because we made the Arqads before we made because the Tuuphra change was implemented, but whatever. You put some sugar in a barrel with some Arqads, and then they turn it into wax. In his great wisdom, Arch has injected Tuuphras, so we can see all of the liquids go to the places that they're supposed to go, and make this stuff. And soon, we will have sugar. Amazing. The wax barrel that we make from the sugar will get unbarreled into wax, and finally, you can turn the wax and hot air into Arqad empty honeycombs. And you are one step closer to being able to have Arqads. Once you have those Arqad empty honeycombs, you can start feeding them Ulrichs. Oh shit, I forgot to tell you about Ulrichs! Like I said, Arqads eat living animals to make their honey, and one of those animals is Ulrichs. Ulrichs are one of your first animals that require you to have their food before you do anything, and to make the Ulrich food, we needed Fawogi, Relesia, and a bunch of other stuff we already had. We actually did not have normal Relesias on the bus, so I pulled some shenanigans to get it on the bus anyway. But Ulrich food combined with Fawogi gives you some Ulrich cubs, and then give them some Relesia seeds, because I think these poor animals that we're about to slaughter with Arqads, horrifically, are vegetarians. And then you make Ulrichs, and their only purpose in life is to either make more cubs. No, actually, they don't even have a purpose to do that. They just send themselves off to get slaughtered forever. Feed Arqads with Ulrichs, and they will fill empty honeycombs with honey to make them Arqad honeycombs, which you can then empty to get Arqad honey itself. One of the things you can do with this Arqad honey, which might be the thing you want to do first, is barrel the Arqad honey, because as it turns out, you can make more wax from Arqad honey. Arch has just set up the recipe in this apiary hydrocarbon plant. It just takes Arqad honey barrels and turns them into wax barrels. In fact, it's doing it right now, so you can see the animation for the Arqad building. Wow, this is so lovely. How amazing. Those bees will kill you. That's why there's a glass cover on them. And then once you get more wax, you can put it in a barreling machine, and you'll get the wax out, and then you can turn the wax into more honeycombs. You can also turn them into another kind of comb, because for some reason there's multiple kinds, called the empty combs, which you could also make using a bunch of other random shit, but that is annoying. Finally, we are ready to talk about the actual Arqad loop. Using these Arqad honeycombs, you can apply some Arqad eggs and cage frogs, because they lay the maggots in the Vrox, and then the Vrox die, and then they give you Arqad maggots. So, again, really horrific. After our Vrox die to give us Arqad maggots, we get some used combs out, which you turn into wax and then turn back into empty honeycombs that you can stick back into the honeycomb loop. Meanwhile, however, you send your maggots over to do even more terrible things. You give the maggots to Vrox, and then they form nests in the Vrox with the help of rock food and Arqad honey barrels and an empty comb, and I'm going to tell you where you'll get that empty comb because it looks like you lose the comb during this recipe, but anyway. Once you get that Arqad nest, you stick it in the building that rolls for Arqad Queen, and you get a used comb back. And of course, that comb can be turned into wax, and then wax can be turned into the original empty comb that you used to make the horrific Arqad nest. And that's how you roll for the queen 5 million times. Remember, you need those eggs from the cDNA recipe, or you can spend a long time save scumming and watching anime. You also need a ton of Arqads as modules for the buildings. Luckily, you get them when you're making the eggs, so gradually you'll just fill up all the buildings. But as you can see, there are so many buildings to put Arqads into. So I'm not going to say that we didn't, use a billion cDNA. We did use a billion cDNA because we needed all of those Arqads initially. And I think part of the reason for the design choice where you have to roll so many times for the queen is to incentivize you to automate cDNA. And automating cDNA is a thing that's very different from other things you've automated before, because you're automating something that you're using in quantities as low as the hundreds, and yet it's so annoying to make that you had better automate it anyway. And that's a theme that will happen every now and then in Pyanodons, and I think it's actually pretty interesting. So we did use a lot of the cDNA that I created. We just didn't use as much as I expected to use, but it incentivized me to automate, and for that, I'm happy. Also, a wonderful thing is happening. You can see the logistic bots, which we made with our beautiful niobium just before setting up the Arqad build. I was like, Arch, why can't you just make 5 million belts for the Arqad build? Why would you waste your time making logistics bots? And honestly, this build probably would have been pretty horrific if you had to use belts instead of bots.
Especially when the devs decide to randomly change the recipe.
But that means we get to see their cute little robot bodies flying everywhere, and they are a much less horrific, vaguely bug-looking thing than the Arqads are. Once you actually have the queens, you can replicate Arqads using this old queen recipe. And it's a good idea to bring in the red hot coke from some coke build you might have, because it increases the number of Arqad eggs you get, and you do have a chance of losing your queen, and that would be terrible. You also have to pipe in some natural gas to this system. If you want to make natural gas, I think the only place you get it initially is from raw gas and gasoline. And raw gas, if you were to follow this really long belt down, takes us to this bitumen seep, where we've slapped down a natural gas derrick. Because once again, you need a bitumen seep for something, and we stuck a natural gas derrick on it to get out the raw gas. So that was like a minor issue, but ultimately there were a lot of fun little bits that were involved in making this build. And although it was at times frustrating, I'm pretty sure Arch enjoyed it. Question mark, question mark, question mark.
Question mark, question mark, question mark.
And I almost wish I'd done it. But also, I don't almost wish I'd done it, and I'm glad someone else went through that torture instead of me.
You can do it next time.
Anyway, I think that's most of the random little features about Arqads that I need to mention. I hope this helps a little bit in deciphering the insanity that is Arqads in the first place, because, wow, is there a lot of random stuff you need. And it was initially really hard, when you get the Arqad recipe, you look at all of these recipes, and you're like, what is all this stuff? Oh my god, please. But we did it. However, I think that's it for today's episode. I don't think this build needs a name. If you want to name it, you can, I guess, but it's fine. As always, if you have any feedback, I'd love to hear it. I hope you enjoyed.